Senator Dick Durbin didn't come to play. In a tense Senate hearing, he dropped a question that sliced straight to the heart of Washington's hypocrisy. Why is America cutting health research for the very soldiers it sends into war, while pouring millions into pomp, parades, and spectacle? For decades, men and women in uniform have returned home carrying scars most of us can't see, cancers tied to toxic exposure, brain injuries from constant blasts, and the silent struggles that follow them long after the battlefield fades. Yet instead of ramping up life-saving research, the Pentagon slashed funding. Durbin's voice cracked through the silence of the chamber, forcing the Secretary of Defense to answer whether this government values its troops' health or just their usefulness in combat.
My turn.
I can take a subtle hint.
We're just going to have to get the gentleman from Kansas a clock.
I thought it meant I had 4 minutes and 55 seconds left.
Mr. Secretary, I was surprised to learn that medical research has discovered the probability that men and women who serve our nation develop certain cancers more prevalent among them than the general population. Are you aware of this?
That men and women in uniform may develop certain different cancers than civilians?
More frequent and the like?
I'm not familiar with the particular study that you're referring to, but I'd be interested to see it.
Also, I learned at the same time that brain injuries are particularly prevalent among some members of our military. And understanding the violence of that experience, it's not a surprise. But it does have long-term impact. Were you aware of that?
Yes, sir.
Do you know why?
Well, decades of deployments to places where explosions, large and small, happen on the regular basis, and certain people are right next to small explosions on a regular basis or big explosions in one incident, or they have a duty MOS, like you're an artilleryman, where the constant thud of that alters the physical aspect of your brain in ways that we don't fully understand, but we know are caused by that service. So we're very aware of that.
Do you feel a special responsibility as Secretary of Defense representing these services and the men and women who are part of them to make sure that we get as quickly as we can to the bottom of this and figure out what we can do, if anything, to reduce the likelihood of additional cancers or brain injuries?
Senator, I served with a lot of men who were affected in a lot of ways by those types of symptoms, including symptoms that led to the taking of their own life. Yes. This is a deadly serious issue. We are committed to getting to the bottom of who it affects and why, and making sure we do right by it.
So let me tell you what I've done about it. As chairman of this subcommittee at one point in time, we have dramatically increased the medical research to protect the men and women in uniform. As we learn these things, we want to get to the bottom of it as quickly as possible. It is enough for me that they risk their lives for our country. We shouldn't make it a more dangerous situation, and we ought to understand what's going on in their minds and their bodies when they serve. And as a result of that, we have dramatically increased defense medical research. I think we owe it to the men and women in uniform. Your budget cuts two-thirds of that amount for defense health research. How can that be consistent with our mutual goal of making the military life a safer life for our men and women in uniform?
Well, Senator, I would take issue with your characterization that all 2/3 of that, whatever was reduced, is focused on the issues that you just spoke about, because those are issues that, as a secretary who's very close to these issues and knows people close to these issues, my team knows that's exactly the type of research that we would fund. But we did find lots of other research inside the Defense Department to the tens and millions, and in some cases, hundreds of millions of dollars that was a boondoggle for the American people.
Why?
And
Why do you say,
proud to
give me an
rid of it.
example of a boondoggle in medical research in
There are
defense health.
I mean, we're talking about some stuff I shouldn't say in public. You know, marbles in the rear ends of cats. Tens of millions of dollars, things that don't have
like the
a connection to what you're talking about.
Is
so
this
I
like the
respect
350-year-old Social Security check? that the president told us?
Senator, I respect
I would-
completely the issue that you're speaking with, and this department couldn't be more sympathetic to that and
Well,
ensure that it's
it's-
funded. But the Defense Department has been a place where organizations, entities, and companies know they can get money almost unchecked to
That's
whether or
not
not
true.
it actually applies to things that happen on the battlefield.
That's just not
That's
even
what
close.
we worked very hard to find in ways that other secretaries have not.
Let me tell you,
This
that's
committee
a-
and others talk about waste, fraud, and abuse all the time. We have actually gone after waste, fraud, and abuse because
Let me
every
just
dollar
tell
that's
you that
spent is a
eliminating-
dollar we can pour into the war fight.
Eliminating 2/3 of the money for defense health research. Put that next to the decision to cut NIH medical research by 40%. Does that make America great again for these military families? I don't think so. $45 million for a parade, for God's sake. Money should be put in defense medical research instead of wasted on some pomp and circumstance for the president. This is not consistent with what the men and women in uniform deserve.
Senator Hoeven, then Senator Schatz, Senator Bozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank you for your.
And just when the exchange couldn't get more heated, another senator stormed in with a jaw-dropping argument involving marbles and cats, turning the hearing into a spectacle no one saw coming. But beneath the absurdity, the stakes couldn't be higher. Every soldier knows that war doesn't end when the gunfire stops. For thousands of veterans, the real battles begin long after they've returned home. Studies have shown something disturbing. Service members face higher risks of cancers than civilians. Years of breathing toxic dust, exposure to burn pits, and living near chemical hazards take a toll that no parade can mask. And then there are the brain injuries, silent, devastating, and often ignored. The constant thud of artillery, the shock waves from roadside bombs, even the pressure waves from heavy weapons, these don't just fade into the background. They carve scars into the brain itself, leaving troops with memory loss, migraines, mood swings, and sometimes worse. Families see it up close. The soldier who once seemed unbreakable suddenly struggles with confusion, depression, or illnesses that doctors can't easily explain. These aren't isolated stories, they're patterns woven into the lives of countless military households. And as more research emerges, the truth becomes harder to deny. The hidden costs of service are mounting, and the price is being paid in hospital visits, broken families, and early graves. But here's the question Washington keeps dodging: will leaders actually do something about it? Senator Dick Durbin wasn't content to let the issue slide. In front of cameras and colleagues, he pressed the Secretary of Defense with the kind of bluntness that left no room for spin. If soldiers are coming home with higher rates of cancer, if brain injuries are quietly tearing lives apart, then why is Washington cutting medical research that could save them? For Durbin, this wasn't a budget question, it was a moral test. He reminded the room that these weren't abstract statistics. They were the lived struggles of men and women who answered the call to serve, only to face new battles when they came home. Families bury loved ones far too soon. Veterans wrestle with symptoms they can't explain. Communities see the toll, yet the resources to fight back remain scarce. Durbin framed it as a betrayal hiding in plain sight. America loves to say, support the troops, but does that promise to extend past the battlefield, or is it just a slogan wheeled out on Veterans Day? His challenge was simple: if Congress can't protect soldiers' health, then what good are all the speeches, salutes, and flag-waving? The silence that followed his words said more than any answer. The Secretary of Defense leaned forward, clearly aware of the weight behind Durbin's words. He didn't deny the reality of cancers or brain injuries. In fact, he admitted he'd served alongside men whose lives had been shattered by these conditions, some even driven to take their own lives. The issue, he said, was real, deadly, and deeply personal. But when it came to the funding cuts, his defense struck a different chord. According to him, the reductions weren't an attack on vital medical research. Instead, they were about trimming waste, projects that had little or no connection to the battlefield. He painted a picture of a Pentagon filled with questionable studies, millions of dollars funneled into experiments with no real benefit to troops. The message was clear: money had to be spent smarter, not just bigger. But even as he tried to reassure the Senate, questions lingered. Was this truly about efficiency, or was it a convenient excuse to shrink budgets at the expense of soldiers' health? For families waiting on answers, the distinction mattered little. What they wanted wasn't talk of waste or reallocation. They wanted solutions. And the next exchange would make that demand impossible to ignore. Then came the moment that would steal headlines. Senator Pete Hegseth jumped into the debate with a fiery rebuttal, dismissing Durbin's concerns by pointing to what he called absurd examples of Pentagon waste. His weapon, a bizarre study involving, believe it or not, marbles in cats' rear ends. The room reacted with a mix of disbelief and amusement, but Hegseth wasn't joking. To him, these kinds of projects proved that the system was bloated with nonsense, and slashing the budget was not only justified but necessary. On the surface, his argument struck a chord with Americans already weary of government waste. The idea that millions of taxpayer dollars were being thrown at ridiculous experiments was infuriating, and Hegseth knew it. But critics quickly pointed out the flaw, highlighting a handful of strange studies didn't erase the fact that critical medical research was also on the chopping block. Behind the theatrics, the lives of soldiers still hung in the balance, the spectacle made for a viral soundbite, no doubt. Yet beneath the humor was something darker, the risk of using outlandish examples as cover to gut programs that veterans desperately need. And the next round of the debate would make that danger impossible to ignore. The clash between Durbin and Hegseth exposed something bigger than a single budget line. For years, Washington has used tales of ridiculous spending as political cover, point to one absurd project, rile up the public, and suddenly it becomes easier to justify sweeping cuts that slash through everything, including the programs that matter most. That's exactly what was happening here. Yes, waste exists. But lumping cancer research and brain injury studies into the same pile as cat marble experiments is more than misleading, it's dangerous. For soldiers battling illnesses tied directly to their service, every dollar cut means another unanswered question, another treatment delayed, another life put at risk. Yet in the halls of power, the debate too often centers on optics and sound bites rather than survival. Durbin saw it for what it was, a shell game that swapped substance for spectacle. Billions still flow toward new weapon systems, flashy contracts, and even presidential parades, while medical research, arguably the most direct form of supporting the troops, gets shortchanged. It's a cycle as old as Washington itself, but this time the contrast was too glaring to ignore. And in the next exchange, Durbin drove that contrast home with devastating force. Senator Durbin didn't hold back when it came time to lay out the choice in front of the nation. On one side, he said, were programs that directly impact the lives of service members, cancer research, treatments for traumatic brain injury, and the long-term health studies that could finally explain why so many veterans are sick. On the other side, $45 million for a military parade, a spectacle designed for optics, not survival. The contrast was brutal, and that was the point. Durbin argued that America's priorities were upside down. Politicians never hesitate to fund displays of strength, but when it comes to the hidden wounds of war, suddenly every penny is questioned. For military families, the message felt like a slap in the face: fireworks over funerals, flags over medicine. The secretary insisted reforms were reining in waste, but the numbers told a different story. Cuts to defense health research and even NIH programs meant veterans were once again being asked to sacrifice twice, once on the battlefield and again at home. Durbin's final words hit hard. Supporting the troops isn't about slogans or parades, it's about whether America is willing to fight for their lives after the war. The hearing ended, but the echoes of that debate still hang heavy. At its core, this wasn't just about numbers on a budget sheet, it was about what America truly values. Do we measure our commitment to the troops with fireworks and parades, or with the quiet, unglamorous work of funding cancer research and treating brain injuries? Senator Durbin made the case that if soldiers can risk their lives in combat, the least Washington can do is risk political capital to protect their health. Anything less, he argued, is betrayal wrapped in patriotic slogans. But the larger question remains unanswered. Will leaders in Washington choose spectacle over survival? Will billions keep flowing into contracts and ceremonies, while veterans struggle with illnesses no one wants to talk about? Or will this debate finally force a reckoning with the hidden costs of war? That's the choice staring America in the face, and it's one that every voter, every family, and every service member has a stake in. So what do you think? Should Congress cut parades and fund research, or is this just politics as usual? Drop your thoughts below and don't forget to subscribe. The next story takes this controversy even further.